Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Comic Book University. I'm your host, Professor Bill. Let's get back into Ghost Rider. Now, Ghost Rider, so far still, Phantom Rider, Lincoln Slade. To best describe Lincoln Slade, the brother of Carter Slade, the Marvel original Phantom Rider, Ghost Rider, it should be understood, the old saying, that he who the gods would destroy, they first drive mad. And that's exactly what happened with Lincoln Slade. Now, I mentioned before this meteor that came down, Flaming Star, the medicine man who'd saved Carter Slade, had the dust inside. It was more than just that. The idea was that this was a real deal spiritual send-off. We will get into the spirits of vengeance, all the different varieties and these basic beings that exist and possess or give power to the various Ghost Riders. This wasn't necessarily canon at the time, but it did come full swing once we discovered what happened with Lincoln Slade, because they never really did anything with him in the comics, in his own series. They did eventually have it later on. West Coast Avengers, one of my absolute favorite comic series ever. For a while, I actually liked it better than the Avengers. That's going to be its own video. But West Coast Avengers, they had something where the Knight Rider, he was called at the time, see the last video to see why that was just silly. They didn't know. Whatever. Anyway, so they had it where he joined forces with a few other Wild West kind of characters, and it was one of the last appearances of the Teen Brigade, a Rick Jones not super group, just teenagers on a ham radio. They didn't do much with that. Very scattered. Let it be. So he formed a Wild West supergroup with a bunch of others, and in their exploits, eventually they came across the West Coast Avengers. One of those characters in the team, which consisted of the leader, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, who wasn't popular at the time. Today, he's considered extremely popular. Looking for a Netflix series with him one day. But he wasn't popular pretty much at all at the time when he was a West Coast Avenger. Several others, but Bobby Morse or Mockingbird was one of those members. She was in a relationship with Hawkeye at the time. She was a former biologist. She became a spy, and now she's a superhero. She has no superpowers. She's much like Hawkeye. She's simply, Hawkeye is good with a bow and arrow, and Mockingbird's good with battle staves. She could form into one big staff or break them apart and use them as screamer sticks. And her costume was bullet resistant. Not bulletproof, bullet resistant. There's a difference. So she couldn't take a direct hit and be okay, but her costume afforded her certain abilities. And she was just really good in the martial arts. So the thing about her and Lincoln Slade was that she wound up being sent to the past, and everybody was kind of sent all over the place. Now, this was West Coast Avengers Volume 2, number 18 through 23, that she wound up teaming up with these Wild West characters. It was in the past, 1800s. And when Lincoln saw her, the Knight Rider, Phantom Rider, Ghost Rider, saw her, he was already crazy, but he was still a good guy. But he already had madness seeping into him. Because while Carter was that prophesized one, Lincoln was not. And wearing that costume for so long, he was being turned crazy. And it really came out because when he saw Mockingbird, by the way, quick aside, for you to get a good idea of who Mockingbird is, a little bit at least, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. For second and third season had Mockingbird in it. She was just called Barbara Morse. She was codenamed Mockingbird. Adriana Pilecki played her. Coincidentally, Adriana Pilecki also played Wonder Woman in a pilot that was never actually released, a television series. All that aside, so he saw Barbara Morse, Mockingbird, and fell in love with her. Imagine her to be some kind of a goddess. They were destined to be together because he was loco en la cabeza. So in these issues of the West Coast Avengers, he kidnaps her and gives her a love potion. I don't know if it was love potion number 9. Some of you are laughing at that. Others are going, what? And you'll look it up and see it's a stupid joke. Whatever. The idea is that she was given a love potion that she wound up falling in love with Lincoln. He revealed himself as Lincoln. And more than that, she forgot her own past. So she didn't recognize her teammates and would actually fight against them if they came to try and rescue her. And you got the Rawhide Kid comes to try and save her, and these guys from the past. And she fights them off. Eventually, they are able to get through to her as the love potion is wearing off. Lincoln rides off to Spirit Mountain, I think it's called. And here he kind of tries to seek guidance from the great spirits. It's really just more lunacy setting in. But Barbara realizes what happened. And more than that, why West Coast Avengers was an incredibly adult comic. While she was under the influence of this love potion, she realized that she had consensual relations with Lincoln, but since she was under the influence of this drug, it wasn't actually consensual at all. She recalled this, she realized this, and she obviously, and rightfully so, felt violated. So she decides to go after Lincoln now, and she's got really bad intentions. She convinces her friends to stay behind and let her go by herself, and she rides. She goes after Lincoln. Raining, nighttime, nothing's going to stop her. She meets him on top of this mountain. Accusations are made back and forth. He's nuts and argues that they are destined for each other, and she'll see. And they fight. She beats the living snot out of this moron. He falls off the mountain but holds onto the side, the ledge, and it's raining. It's very wet, and he's slipping off, and Barbara does nothing to help him. Had plenty of time to do it. She does nothing. She watches him slip off and fall to his death. Now, we're going to slip to the side in continuity, but retroactively. There's another Ghost Rider who shows up, and his name is Reno Jones. Now, Reno Jones is actually an African-American character, so wow, we've got an African-American who gets to play Ghost Rider now. Phantom Rider, Knight Rider, and yeah, all 3 names are used, especially here. Now, he shows up in the Blaze of Glory, the last ride of the Western Heroes miniseries. It was supposed to be 2 parts. They made it into 4 parts, extended it because... And it came out in the year 2000. And this was supposed to be just a huge run. It was known to be, 4 issues, but it was meant to be a huge, big shebang where they bring back these Western heroes and have one last hurrah. And one of the things that they did was that they returned Reno Jones. And all sorts of things happen. interesting stuff, but not as interesting as to get into this because it really doesn't have too much to do with anything. He simply takes on the mantle of Ghost Rider at one point, the Western hero, and is able to fight off these bad guys with his cronies. And the interesting part about Reno Jones, probably a character you've never heard of before, but he's historical. We know that back in 1972 and 73, he had a short 7-issue run with his partner, Kid Cassidy. Now, Reno Jones had a run back in 1972 and 73 of a series called, it was only 7 issues, called Reno Jones and Kid Cassidy Gunhawks. Again, only 7 issues. It's not going to hurt to go back, try and find these issues and read them. I don't know that they would necessarily be a lot of money. I'm pretty sure that issue 7 would be worth something, though. Honestly, I got to get out to a comic book store again and like a good one and actually look this stuff up, because I would be interested to find out how much this would cost. It's a historical comic in the sense that the series was called Reno Jones and Kid Cassidy Gunhawks, but in issue 6, Kid Cassidy dies. Kid Cassidy was just a white guy, Irish guy, you can tell by the name. Reno Jones, black guy, and both of them just good shots. They're regular Western cowboy type heroes. But Kid Cassidy gets killed in issue number 6. So issue number 7 is simply called, instead of the two of them names and Gun Hawks, they name it Reno Jones Gun Hawk, singular. So what does this do? This is now the second character in comic book history, Marvel history, go figure, with his own self-titled comic. The first self-titled African-American hero was actually Luke Cage. And make no mistake, Luke Cage will be done soon. He's got his own Netflix series coming out right after Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. premieres. So he's obviously going to have to be touched on. But here we have Luke Cage, first self-titled African-American hero in his own comic title, and Reno Jones is actually the second. So if you didn't know him before, you know him now. And this is a part of comic book history. This is a part of African-American history. It's just a part of the mythos of the Ghost Rider, so it has to be in there. But he wasn't possessed by the gods. Maybe he was. Maybe he... the fact is that we really just don't know. They never really explored it again afterwards, but he is a part of this mythos, so he has to be mentioned in this. Now, when I start getting really big into the great spirits, the spirits of vengeance, which these two might actually be the same, because we're talking about the great spirits who gave the prophecy of Carter Slade coming, and these we assume they're Native American spirits, but that might not necessarily be the case. And when we discover that the spirits of vengeance for the Johnny Blaze and future Ghost Riders, we can make the connection that they're both the same, or at the very least very closely related, because they're choosing heroes to go off and do these superheroic feats to save people, to at the very least avenge people who've been wronged, killed, when innocent blood is spilled. So Reno is now a part of that. But now is when we're going to start to get into the mystical aspect of these Phantom Riders. But that's going to have to wait until next episode. Guys, thanks for showing up. Please subscribe. Class dismissed.